All right, so we got this movie, which basically it's like an old sort of movie from that time. It has obviously Mark Wahlberg when he was really, really young, but he still looks about the same, which is really quite frightening because there are some people that really don't age, and there are some people that really do over time. But obviously, 18 years, he's still got the same looks, which is great for him, but not so great for other people. Anyway, so it's got Chung Young Fat, I think his name is. He's got a really weird Chinese name. Um, but he's sort of been in some American movies. Um, he was in that movie with Sean William Scott, where Sean William Scott was absolutely ghastly in it, but Telling the Fact was actually really good in it. I mean, I'm not a really big Sean William Scott fan, so that's kind of where I stand. But I thought he played the part really well, Chow Yun Fat. So um, it has sort of that thing which I think American movies do, that it's from a certain time because you see the Twin Towers in quite a few shots, so it's quite an old movie then. So obviously 1998. Don't really know who directed it. I can't really think it was somebody on the back of the sleeve that sort of thought, okay, yeah, it's that guy or that person or whatever or that brand of filmmaking. But I think it's a really interesting movie. I think there's a lot of good stuff in it. I don't think it's exactly great, but I think it's better than average. I think it's probably about the same level of the three films I've reviewed. It's better than Ruth and Alex, or what was it, Alex and Ruth? I sort of got the name mixed up before I was going to review it. But anyway, um, but you have these two people who are put together as cops, obviously Mark Wahlberg and Chow Yun Fat, and there's this dynamic that you think's not really going to be there at the beginning because they still don't seem to be getting along at first and seem to be bickering and arguing and seem to be a bit awkward, like their first drive together in a cop car. But not long after that, they seem to really click. And even though maybe there's some disagreement of how they've done things by their side of the law or by the FBI, they still don't give a shit. They still have done it, because this movie's quite graphic in places. I mean, you see some pedestrians being really mowed down with machine guns, and it doesn't like cut away. You see all of it. So, I mean, there's some movies where obviously they don't really show the violence and it's off screen, but you see all of this. So it's really no surprise for that. And I think what's interesting though is kind of reminds me of like Rush Hour because of Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, that you kind of thought, oh, they're not really gonna come together because at the beginning of Rush Hour, they're not really getting on because obviously he pretends he doesn't know the language and stuff like that, and he goes into a bar and then doesn't really fit in Jackie Chan, but then Chris Tucker does, and he got all the lingo and kind of knows how to talk and get himself into a room and get questions out of people, and obviously, have them answered. And there's that thing still here, but I think the Rush Hour movies are slightly better than this movie. But still, I enjoyed this movie for what it is. I think a lot of the plot is really obvious. Like, I saw it coming so many times. And then you sort of thinking, oh, hang on, there's that thing. Ah, yes. And then you sort of, before they say it, you know what's going to happen next. And I've sort of talked about this before in the past, that there are some movies where it's really annoying, where you kind of know what's going to happen. But for me, I've seen so many movies now that you kind of know what's going to happen, so it's not really a negative most of the time. Sometimes it is, but like, for example, Toy Story 3, I kind of had an idea that something wasn't going to be so pleasant about that, daycare place they went to, and then it happened exactly as I imagined. That it went sour and the thing with Lotso and stuff like that. So sorry if you haven't seen Toy Story 3, but oh well, I've spoiled it. Well, it's been out for 6 years, so you should have seen it now anyway. But there's that thing with this movie that there's sort of people who can't be touched by the police, and there's like one guy who's like old, and there's some other guy who's not quite as old, but he seems like you can't really trust him, but you know you can't shoot him down because then his gang will come after you, and that kind of thing. And I found that really interesting, and the way that Mark Wahlberg feels fear because it's a great little scene, and it's probably the best bit of the entire film. They're like, oh, I really like that. Like that stood out, you know. That he's just walking down the street, and then out of nowhere he just appears and starts pacing, walking with him, and telling him, "Oh, you got to go do this," you know, and being very serious and telling him exactly what he needs to know in about less than a minute, and then walks off. And then Mark Wahlberg just carries on walking, but then that guy's gone somewhere else, and it's like he was never there. And that created something really cinematic, and it was like, like like not like 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 that thing of being shocked, but it just it took it exactly where it needs to go at that point of the movie because like oh like that thing's gonna happen now, but I think it kind of saw that coming, but it just gets you excited to watch the next scene. So there's that. But I think also there's something quite different in this movie that something kind of happened which I wasn't really expecting at the end. Somebody kind of dies, even though I kind of saw, or maybe something might not be right, but then something did happen that was quite unpleasant. But I won't say who it actually happens to. You can watch the movie and figure out who is going to be Mark Wahlberg or Chow Yun-fat, but I won't say. But overall, just to wrap up, I think it's a decent movie. I don't think it's like fantastic. I think there are like things that obviously do reflect, like obviously the Rush Hour thing. Um, but it definitely is a buddy cop kind of movie, and obviously this was a year before. I think was it? Well, no, same year as Rush Hour One came out. Yeah, so there's obviously that thing would have been a little bit weird at the time to have, watching both those movies in the same year. But obviously, I haven't. So obviously, I can sort of grown up with the Rush Hour movies, so I can kind of enjoy them for different things. But yeah, so it's a good movie. I recommend it. Not perfect, but definitely a lot better than Alex and Ruth.